Someone killed a family of 4, and then opened the refrigerator and ate their ice cream. 4 small containers, one after another. He drank bottles of barley tea from their kitchen. He used their computer, sat at their desk at 1 in the morning, and browsed the internet. He went to the bathroom and did not flush. He found the family's first aid kit, opened it, and bandaged his own wounds cuts he had sustained during the killing when the father fought back. He may have slept on their sofa. He stayed in the house for hours, surrounded by the bodies of the people he had just murdered, and he behaved as if the house now belonged to him. Then, sometime before dawn, he left. He left behind his jacket, his hat, his gloves, his hip bag, his shoes, his blood, his fingerprints, his DNA, and more than 12,000 individual pieces of evidence. And he was never seen again. I have read about a lot of murders. Killers panic, killers flee, killers scrub surfaces and burn clothing and drive through the night to put distance between themselves and what they have done. This person did none of those things. He sat down in a dead family's kitchen and ate their food. That behavior tells you one of 2 things. Either this person had no fear of being caught, or he knew with certainty that he did not exist in any system that could catch him. Hold that thought, because it is the key to everything that follows. The family was the Miyazawas. Mikio was 44, a marketing professional. Yasuko was 41, a tutor who taught children in the adjoining house where her mother lived. Their daughter Nina was 8. Their son Rei was 6. They lived in a quiet residential area of Setagaya Ward in southwest Tokyo, a neighborhood that had been slowly emptying as the city government bought out houses to expand a nearby park. By the end of 2000, the Miyazawas were nearly alone on their block. Most of their neighbors had already sold and moved. The house next door where Yasuko's mother lived was one of the few still occupied. The emptiness around them may explain why no one heard anything on the night of December 30th, and why the killer felt comfortable staying as long as he did. I will describe the killing once briefly, because the violence is not where this case lives. The case lives in what happened after. Sometime after 11 at night, the intruder entered through a bathroom window on the 2nd floor. He attacked Nina first in the children's room. Mikio heard the commotion and ran to protect his daughter. He fought the intruder and was stabbed to death. The struggle was fierce enough that both men bled heavily. Mikio may have wounded the killer with his own hands. Yasuko and Rei were killed afterward. The murder weapon was a knife the intruder brought with him, a sashimi knife, later identified but never traced to a point of purchase. I want to stay with Mikio for a moment because in every telling of this case he is reduced to a name on a list of 4. He was a father who heard his daughter being attacked and ran toward the sound. He fought a man with a knife, bare-handed, hard enough to wound him. He lost. But the blood he drew from the killer, the cuts he inflicted, became the physical evidence that would define the investigation for the next quarter century. Every piece of DNA, every fingerprint, every trace of the killer that the police have spent 25 years analyzing exists, in part because Mikio Miyazawa fought back. He could not save his family. He gave the investigation the only chance it ever had. And it was not enough. And then the killer stayed. And this is where I need you to shift your attention, because everything the investigation knows about this person comes not from the killing, but from the hours after it. And the hours after are what make this case unlike any other I have ever covered. He ate 4 containers of ice cream. He drank barley tea. He used the family's computer at 1:18 a.m., accessing the internet visiting sites that investigators have analyzed without public disclosure of their content. He rifled through the house, pulling documents and personal papers out of drawers and dumping them in the bathtub. He used sanitary napkins from the bathroom to bandage a wound on his hand. He defecated in the toilet and did not flush, providing investigators with a sample they could use to determine what he had eaten before the murders. He left behind clothing, a jacket, of which only 130 had been sold in Tokyo, a hat, a pair of gloves. His shoes, white running shoes, size 11, manufactured in South Korea, were not sold in Japan. His 2 black handkerchiefs smelled of Drakkar Noir cologne. One had a slit cut in the center, a technique that investigators linked to fish processing workers in Chinese factories who use it to prevent a knife from slipping. From all of this, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police assembled the most detailed portrait of an unknown killer that any murder investigation in the world has ever produced. His DNA indicated a father of East Asian ancestry, a genetic marker found in roughly 1 in 5 Koreans, 1 in 10 Chinese, 1 in 13 Japanese, and a mother of Southern European descent, possibly Mediterranean. He was estimated to be between 15 and 22 years old at the time of the murders. He was approximately 170 centimeters tall and thin. He wore clothing and shoes that pointed toward Korea as a possible origin. He used a cologne sold internationally. He handled a knife in a way that suggested specific occupational training. And none of it was enough. The police compared 1.3 million DNA samples. No match. They checked 5 million fingerprints. No match. Over 246,000 investigators have worked on the case across 25 years. The reward for information, 20 million yen, the largest in Japanese history, has produced no credible lead. The portrait is complete. The person it describes does not appear to exist in any database in any country that the investigation has been able to access. And here I have to be honest about the system rather than the suspect, because blaming the Tokyo police would be easy and wrong. They did not fail to collect. They did not fail to analyze. They did not fail to pursue leads across borders. What they encountered was a structural gap, and this gap is the actual story. In 2000, Japan had no centralized DNA database comparable to CODIS in the United States. It had no national law governing the investigative use of DNA. Privacy regulations made mass DNA comparison extremely difficult. The evidence was all there. The infrastructure to read it, to run it against every person who might match, was not. The killer left a perfect trail of himself in a country whose system was not built to follow that kind of trail. And by the time Japan began modernizing its forensic database capabilities, the trail was 20 years cold. In 2019, police announced the Miyazawa house would be demolished due to structural deterioration. The family protested. The house came down anyway. The lot is now part of the expanded Soshigaya Park, an empty square of grass where children play. Every year, on December 30th, Yasuko's mother and supporters place flowers at the fence around the site. The house is gone. The evidence is preserved in police custody. And the most complete forensic portrait ever assembled of a killer stares out of the file at a world that cannot put a name to the face. 12,500 pieces of evidence. A face, a body, type, a ancestry, a shoe size, a cologne, a knife technique. Everything except the one thing that matters, a name. And the question this case leaves you with is not who did this, It is whether any system, anywhere, is built to catch a person who exists outside every system. It would be natural to hear that and think the problem was technology. Japan in 2000 no DNA database, a gap in the infrastructure. Given better tools, the evidence would have spoken. The answer was there, it just needed a system wide enough to hear it. So let me take you somewhere with no technology gap at all. A country with full forensic capability, NATO-level intelligence, sharing an advanced police force and a justice system that had every tool available. And show you a case where the evidence was just as abundant, ballistics matched, witnesses' survived patterns were clear, and the answer was just as absent. Not because the system was too narrow to catch the killer, but because the evidence told you everything except the one thing you actually needed to know why. A group of armed men walked into a Delhaize supermarket in the town of Ulst, Belgium, on a Saturday evening and opened fire. They shot customers. They shot employees. They shot a woman sitting in a parked car with her 14-year-old daughter and her 9-year-old son. The girl survived. The mother and boy did not. 8 people died in the Ulst attack. The amount of money taken from the store was negligible. The killers left. That is not a robbery. A robbery takes something. Whatever happened in Ulst, and in more than a dozen other attacks across the Belgian province of Brabant between 1982 and 1985, was something else. And the fact that nobody has ever been able to say with certainty what that something else was, is the reason 28 people are dead, and no one has ever been convicted. The attacks followed a pattern. Supermarkets and food stores were the primary targets. The assailants were armed with shotguns and handguns and moved with a discipline that witnesses described as military coordinated entry, controlled shooting, efficient withdrawal. Survivors and early CCTV footage, some of the first ever used in a Belgian criminal investigation, identified at least 3 recurring figures. The press named them by their roles the Giant, a tall man who appeared to direct operations. The killer, a shooter whose calm and accuracy under pressure was noted by every surviving witness, and a third member sometimes called the Old Man. They were methodical. They were lethal, and they took almost nothing. I should be clear about why the money matters, because it is the whole at the center of this entire case. In a robbery, the violence is a means to an end. You hurt people to take things. In the Brabant attacks, the violence was grotesquely disproportionate to the take. In some raids, the assailants left with a few thousand francs pocket change compared to what was in the registers. In others, they fired on everyone in sight and then departed without opening the cash drawer at all. This is not the behavior of criminals who need money. This is the behavior of people for whom the money was never the point. And if the money was never the point, then you are left with a question that the Belgian justice system has spent 40 years unable to answer. What was? The theories are loud, and I owe you each one with the honesty it deserves. The first is organized crime, a gang using the supermarket raids as cover or practice for larger operations. This explains the weaponry and the discipline, but not the negligible theft, and no organized crime network has ever been linked to the attacks through evidence. The second, and the one that has drawn the most attention and the most controversy, involves the Belgian state itself. In 1990, the Belgian government publicly confirmed the existence of a clandestine NATO-linked network on its soil, part of what became known as Operation Gladio, a Cold War program of stay-behind networks designed to resist a Soviet invasion. Some investigators and journalists have argued that the Brabant attacks were a strategy of tension acts of violence designed to destabilize, to create fear, to justify a harder security posture, carried out by elements connected to the gendarmerie or the state security apparatus. And here I have to be very careful, because this is the point where legitimate questions meet conspiracy theory, and the line between them is thinner than anyone would like. I will not sell you the Gladio theory as fact. What I will tell you is this: Belgium confirmed the stay-behind network existed. A parliamentary inquiry investigated. The gendarmerie was found to have had connections to far-right groups. Individual gendarmes were identified as having links to people on the periphery of the Brabant investigation. None of this constitutes proof that the state orchestrated the attacks. All of it constitutes a legitimate reason to ask the question, and the question has never been answered because the investigation never penetrated deep enough into the security apparatus to answer it. The third theory is simpler and in some ways harder: a group of individuals with military or law enforcement backgrounds acting on their own for reasons that may have been ideological, personal, or pathological. Not a state operation, not organized crime, just men with training and weapons and a willingness to kill whose motives died with them. I genuinely do not know which of these is closest to the truth. And I want to be honest with you about the discomfort of that, because in most of the cases I cover, I can at least point you toward the most likely shape. Here I cannot. The evidence tells you how the ballistics, the movement patterns the weapon handling. It does not tell you why. And without why, the how is just a description of a nightmare without an explanation. And I think this is the moment to name what makes the Brabant case different from a standard unsolved murder, because the difference matters. When a person is killed and you do not know who did it, you have a tragedy. When 28 people are killed across 3 years in a coordinated campaign, and you do not know why, you have something closer to a wound in the national psyche. Belgium has lived with this for 4 decades. Every few years, a new investigative team reopens the files. Every few years, a new theory surfaces in the press. And every few years, the families of the 28 are asked to relive the worst moment of their lives for a country that still cannot explain why it happened. That cycle, hope, reinvestigation, silence, is its own form of cruelty. And I do not think it ends until someone answers the question that the evidence has been asking since 1982. If it was not about the money, what was it about? There is one more thing, and it is the cruelest legal detail. The Brabant cases are subject to a statute of limitations under Belgian law. It has been extended multiple times. The most recent extension pushed it to 2025. If the clock runs out without a prosecution, the case is formally closed. Not because the evidence was insufficient, not because the investigation was exhausted, but because the law decided that 40 years of unanswered questions was long enough, and that the state's obligation to the dead has an expiration date. 28 people, and the system's final word may not be "we don't know," but we've decided to stop asking. I find that difficult to sit with. I think you should too. The cash registers in Ulst were barely touched. The bodies were not. Whatever the Brabant killers came for, it was not in the registers, and the evidence that might have told us what it actually was has been sitting in files for 4 decades, complete and useless, telling us everything about the crime except the one thing that would make it make sense. Johnson here, one more, and it is the strangest of the 3. If you are the kind of person who stays for cases like these, you already know what the subscribe and the bell are for. Now, let me take you to Norway. In Tokyo, the evidence drew a perfect portrait of the killer, but no one matched the portrait. In Belgium, the evidence reconstructed every detail of the crimes, except the reason behind them. The hole at the center of each case has been getting deeper in Tokyo. The missing piece was a name. In Belgium, it was a motive. The last case digs the hole all the way to the bottom, because in Norway, the evidence is just as abundant: passports, travel, records, coded notebooks, forensic analysis. But the missing piece is not who killed her or why. The missing piece is who she was. A woman died with 9 names, and not one of them was real. Every label had been cut from every piece of clothing she owned, not torn. Cut carefully, deliberately, with scissors or a blade, every manufacturer's tag, every care instruction, every mark that might have connected a blouse or a skirt to a store, a country, a point of purchase. Someone, the woman herself, or someone acting on her behalf, had sat down and methodically removed every trace of origin from every garment in her possession. That is not something a person does in a hurry. It is something a person does as procedure. And when her body was found in a remote valley outside Bergen, Norway, half burned and surrounded by sleeping pills and an empty bottle of petrol, it was the first thing the police noticed. Whoever this woman was, someone had tried to erase her before she died. She was found on November 29, 1970, by a man and his daughter hiking in the Isdalen Valley, a steep rocky gorge near Bergen that locals sometimes called the Valley of Ice. The body was partially burned. Around it, a collection of sleeping pills, 2 bottles that had contained petrol, and the remnants of a fire. Her position suggested she may have been alive when the fire started. The autopsy found a large quantity of sleeping pills in her system, enough to incapacitate, possibly enough to kill, along with bruising on her neck that could indicate strangulation or could be post-mortem artifact. The cause of death has never been conclusively established: suicide or murder. The question divided the investigation from the first day and has never been settled. The Bergen police eventually classified the death as suicide, but the combination sleeping pills and petrol and a remote valley and bruising and a woman with no identity doesn't sit comfortably in a single box, and I will present both possibilities without choosing between them, because choosing would require certainty I do not have. What the investigation uncovered in the days and weeks that followed was not a woman, but a series of layers, each one peeled back to reveal another question underneath. First, 2 suitcases found at the Bergen train station checked under a name that did not match any of the identities later linked to the woman. Inside the suitcases, more clothing with the labels cut out, money in several currencies, a pair of broken sunglasses, wigs, maps of Norwegian cities, and a notebook filled with entries written in a code that the police eventually cracked. The code was a substitution cipher, simple but effective enough to conceal the contents from a casual reader. When decoded, the entries turned out to be a travel itinerary. She had moved through Bergen, Stavanger, Trondheim, Paris, Geneva, Hamburg, Basel, across months under different names, with different passports. At least 9 identities were linked to the woman. She had checked into hotels across Europe using names from different countries: Belgian, French, Italian, none of which could be verified. She spoke multiple languages, including German, French, English, and possibly Flemish. She changed her appearance. She moved constantly. And in every hotel she left, the staff remembered her as polite, quiet, and determined to avoid being photographed or documented. In every case I tell, I try to give the victim back their humanity, their name, their age, the shape of the life they led before it was taken. Here, I cannot do that, and the inability itself is the point. I do not know her name. I do not know her nationality. I do not know if she was 25 or 40. I do not know if she had children or parents who searched for her or a home she left behind. Every piece of information that would make her a person instead of a case file was removed by her or by whoever trained her or by whoever killed her with a thoroughness that I have not seen in any other case. She is the most thoroughly erased human being I have ever tried to write about. And the cruelty of that erasure is not just that the investigation cannot find her killer. It is that the investigation cannot even find her. I want to be honest about what this pattern means because it is the loudest thing in the case, and it points in a direction that the Norwegian government for 50 years has been reluctant to confirm. The combination of multiple false identities, coded communications, constant movement across borders, label-free clothing, and deliberate erasure of personal traces is not the profile of a tourist or a fugitive. It is the profile of an intelligence operative. Bergen in 1970 was a NATO naval base. Norway was a frontline Cold War state sharing a border with the Soviet Union. And a woman with the tradecraft of a professional spy was found dead in the hills above the city. And here I have to stop myself because the word spy is seductive, and I will not let it do the work that evidence should do. It is possible that this woman was a private individual with unusual habits and a talent for deception. It is possible that the labels were cut for reasons unrelated to espionage. It is possible that the coded notebook was the eccentricity of a disturbed mind rather than the tool of a professional. I cannot rule these explanations out. But I can tell you that multiple investigators, journalists, and intelligence analysts who have examined the case, including a major investigative project by NRK Norway's national broadcaster in collaboration with the BBC, have concluded that the intelligence theory is the most consistent with the totality of the evidence. And I can tell you that the Norwegian government classified key portions of the file and that classification has never been fully lifted. The classification is not proof of a cover-up. Governments classify files for many reasons: diplomatic sensitivity, protection of sources, national security concerns that may have nothing to do with the death itself. But the effect of classification is the same, regardless of the reason a portion of the answer is locked in a cabinet that the public cannot open. And when the official conclusion is suicide, but the file that might support or contradict that conclusion is sealed, the credibility of the conclusion erodes with every year it remains sealed. In recent years, isotope analysis of the woman's teeth, a technique that did not exist in 1970, has suggested she may have grown up in an area near the border of France and Germany. DNA has been extracted and analyzed. Genetic genealogy testing has indicated possible roots in the Caucasus region or Central Europe. Each new finding adds another line to her portrait, and each line makes her more mysterious, not less, because none of them converge on a name. And this is the thing I want you to hold on to as we close this case, because it is the purest expression of the paradox at the center of this entire episode. In a normal investigation, each piece of evidence narrows the field. It eliminates possibilities, it focuses. But in the Isdal woman's case, each new discovery widens the field. Isotopes point to France, Germany. DNA suggests Eastern Europe or the Caucasus. Hotel records span half a continent. Each piece of evidence opens a new door instead of closing one. You end up with more possibilities, not fewer. more countries, more languages, more identities layered on top of the emptiness at the center. The evidence does not converge, it diverges. And a diverging trail does not lead you to the truth, it leads you deeper into the maze. And this is where the case meets the thesis of everything I have told you today. In Tokyo, the evidence drew a perfect portrait of the killer, and no one matched it. In Belgium, the evidence told the whole story of the crime, except the reason behind it. In Bergen, the evidence is even more abundant: passports codes, travel records, isotopes, DNA, and the person at the center of all of it is still a ghost. She has been dead for over 50 years, and the world still calls her by the name a journalist gave her, the Isdal woman. Because nobody knows what else to call her. She had 9 names, and none of them were hers. She traveled through 6 countries, and not one of them has claimed her. She lies in an unmarked grave in Bergen, buried in a zinc coffin by order of the police, so that she could be exhumed if she was ever identified. That zinc coffin is an act of faith, the belief that someday someone will come forward and say her name. After 55 years, no one has. A house in Tokyo, where a killer left behind 12,500 pieces of evidence and walked into a world that could not name him. A string of supermarkets across Belgium, where the guns were loud and the motive was silent. A valley in Norway where a woman died carrying 9 false names and no true one. 3 cases, 3 countries, 3 investigations drowning in evidence, and in each one the abundance was the trap. Because we are taught that evidence solves cases, that each piece brings you closer, that the picture sharpens with every detail. These 3 cases say the opposite. Sometimes the picture blurs. Each new detail does not narrow the field it opens. Another door points in another direction, adds another line to a portrait that was already too detailed to match anyone real. The killer in Tokyo left his DNA, his fingerprints, his clothes, his dinner, and his bathroom habits. He might as well have signed his name, except he didn't have one, not in any system that could read it. The killers in Brabant left ballistic evidence witness testimony, and a pattern so clear it could be diagrammed, but the diagram had no caption, and without a why, the how is just a recording of violence. The woman in Bergen left 9 identities, coded notebooks, and a trail across a continent, and every piece of evidence made her harder to identify. Not easier, because each one was another mask layered on top of the last. The most detailed portrait in the world is still just a portrait if no one knows the face. I'm Johnson. Thank you for sitting with the hard ones. I'll see you on the next.